Welcome to St. Matthias, Daily Devotions for March the 23rd, 2020. Our reading today is from Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 29. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became radiant, intensely white, and no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah." For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them, but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. And they asked him, "Why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?" And Jesus said to them, "Elijah does come first to restore all things. And how it is written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt. But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written of him." And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and the scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed, and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." And he answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And it has often cast him into the fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible for the one who believes." And immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, help my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him, and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So the Transfiguration, the first part of this passage today, is important for a number of reasons, not the least that it's God's command. "This is my son, listen to him." The cloud overshadowing represents the Spirit, so it's another of the Trinitarian appearances, really, in the Gospels, where Father, Son, and Holy Spirit sort of converge at once. But also, it's really the turning point of the Gospel that now Jesus does set his face towards Jerusalem, and Jesus heading to Jerusalem to really fulfill what he is to come. Don't talk about this, he says, until the Son of Man rises from the dead. Don't talk about this event until I rise, until I rise from the dead. And they're like, "What does that mean, that he's going to rise from the dead?" But it really is that Jesus is fixed on heading to the cross, heading to fulfill his role as the Messiah, the Christ, the one to bring forth new life and new healing. And we see that immediately as he comes down the mountain, and there's a boy who's filled with the Spirit and consumed by a spirit that's trying to destroy him, makes him deaf, it makes him mute, it tries to throw him into the fire, it convulses him, it's a horrible binding that is happening to this son, and it's no surprise that this is what Jesus encounters when he comes down, because this is really what Jesus ultimately has come to do as the Messiah, the Christ. He's not come to restore Israel to a political power. He's not come to defeat the Romans. He's come to bind up the evil and the sin and the death and the destruction that's around us, and instead cast it out and fill us with the power of God's grace and peace and love. And so when he comes down, he asks that great question to the Father. First he just says, "How long has this been happening?" And he said, "From childhood. And if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus says, if you believe, anything can happen, right? If you believe, God can do whatever. And the Father says, "I believe, help my unbelief. I believe, help my unbelief," which is an incredible statement of faith, and one of those statements that gets used a lot, and really a statement that could be a mantra for us, along the lines of saying, like a Jesus prayer, "Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I believe, help my unbelief. I believe, help my unbelief." And asking for an intense faith that God has, that only God can give us. And this is what, when the disciples say, "How come we couldn't cast out this demon?" Because they'd been doing lots of other things. Remember, a few chapters ago, Jesus gave them authority to cast out demons. He gave them authority to cure the sick. And now this time they couldn't do it. And Jesus said, "Well, this kind of only happens with prayer." And it wasn't that they weren't praying before, but it's there's not just a formula, right? I mean, oftentimes we may think that there's a formula for things that happen. Moses, remember, in the wilderness, thought there was a formula for getting water out of the rock. God said, "Hit the rock and water comes out. Hit the rock, water comes out." Then God told him later, "Speak to the rock." And Moses says, No, I know the formula. Hit the rock, water comes out." And God says, "Now you're not going to the promised land." The same sort of is true with healing, with demons, with just listening to God. Things aren't the same time after time after time. Jesus responds differently when he heals people. He put mud on the man who's was born blind, and told him to go wash on his eyes. He put his thumb into the deaf man's ears. He just spoke to other people. The paralyzed man, and said, "Take up your mat, go home." So there's different ways in which Jesus responded, and he didn't do that willy-nilly, right? He did it because he listens to God. He did it because he's prayerful, and he's in tune with the direction that God has. And this is what by prayer means. It means you need to be listening to God, and this demon just needed to be commanded, really, to come out by the authority of Jesus, by the authority of God. And so for us, as our takeaway from this passage today especially is, Jesus is the one who's come to rescue us from sin and death and hope, or sin and death, and give us hope and peace and joy, one, and two, that though we believe, we can always believe more. God can increase our faith. I believe, help my unbelief. During this time, may God indeed help our unbelief. When things get scary, when things get uncertain, may we turn to the living God who can certainly help our unbelief and increase our faith. Amen.